In this final video of the Disad and Counterplan series, I am going to go over how the affirmative answers a counterplan. In the last video in this series, I want to talk about how to answer a counterplan. So there's a very simple way of remembering it. I did not come up with this, but this is how I have always taught it and remember it. So when you look at a counterplan, you should see a terribly drawn stop sign by me that says stop. And when you see a counterplan, you should stop and remember this acronym because it's going to tell you how to answer counterplans in a debate. So this stands for the following. You can read a solvency deficit. You can read a theory argument. You can read offense, or you can read a permutation, which we often call a perm. So, what do these things mean? Let's start with the first one, solvency. A solvency argument against the counterplan is going to say the affirmative is not solved by the counterplan. So, if they say the regulation counterplan, regulations don't solve escalation because they don't lead to a ban, and then explain the warrants behind why that is true. Solvency would say that the neg counterplan in the debate does not solve an advantage or part of the affirmative in the debate. Pretty simply put. The other way that you can view solvency is that you can be viewed that the counterplan doesn't solve. So this would be used in specific scenarios where the counterplan does something that is not likely to occur. So for instance, there's an old AF and counterplan on space topics that has the federal government do a space elevator. There's lots of really good evidence that says a space elevator is not technologically feasible. That would be the counterplan doesn't solve, whereas the counterplan doesn't solve the advantage part would be like a space elevator doesn't lead to humans inhabiting space in the future because it has failures. So that would be the solvency way that you answer a counterplan. It has no solvency or it does not solve the affirmative. The second way is theory. I'm not going to talk about this very much in this video because it's way beyond the scope of this video, but essentially you can say that in some way, shape, or form, the counterplan did something that theoretically hurt your chances of winning the debate. The most common one of these is called conditionality. So conditionality is the idea of, does the negative have to read the counterplan in the NR? So sure, they introduced the counterplan in the NC in the debate, but do they have to advocate for it in the NR, or that can they revert to going back to the status quo? And your stance on answering those types of questions would be status theory, and the most popular one of those being conditionality. There's a lot of other different theory arguments. This is just an example of one of them. Offense would be you reading something against the counterplan itself. So you could read against the regulation counterplan. You could say regulation causes war. Regulation causes backlash. Regulation causes something bad to happen. It's almost like reading a disadvantage against the counterplan in the debate. That is what we would call offense versus the counterplan. The last and probably most frequently used answer against a counterplan is a permutation. And a permutation is essentially a combination of the affirmative and the counterplan. And they argue, or the affirmative would argue, that by making a permutation, they prove that the counterplan is no longer competitive in the debate. So basically, at a very novice level, you can think of a permutation by saying, can these two things exist in the same world at the same time? The most often neg answer made against this is that when they both are in the same world together, that still links to the disadvantage in the debate. So the most common answer that the negative is going to make versus permutations is that the permutation still is going to cause the disadvantage to happen because it's still likely to include the affirmative. So we said it's a combination of the affirmative and the negative counterplan in the debate. So normally for a permutation to be considered legitimate and okay in the debate, it would have to do all of the affirmative, and it would be combined with part or all of the counterplan. So the permutation can do all of the counterplan, it can do a part of the counterplan, but in order for it normally to be viewed as theoretically legitimate, we think that it has to do all of the AF. Because if the permutation doesn't do all of the AF, then the affirmative is no longer defending what they defended in the AC, which a lot of people view as abusive in the debates that we are having. So that is a basic rundown of different arguments that you can make versus a counterplan. If you don't know what to do, if you're encountering a counterplan that you've never seen before and you have no idea what it does, just think to yourself, stop, solvency, theory, offense, permutation, write an analytical one of each of these things, and try your best in the debate. At least you know what you have to say. Even if you have never heard of it before, you can say it doesn't solve the affirmative's advantages, that it could be combined, that it's a bad idea, and that maybe if you have a good idea what theory is, that they did something that shouldn't be allowed in the debate. So that is a basic rundown of how the AF answers counterplans, and I will see you in the next video.